You've done a lot of interviews, man, but you're finally on the XFL show. This is the XFL show, Oliver, and you're doing it. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on. I'm sorry it took so long to get on the XFL show. You guys should have been first in line.
I know we expected it, but you know what? Better late than never. And we are XFL fans from way back. I mean, I watched the original season. I was living in Los Angeles at the time as a youngster, and I loved a lot about it. I understand there's some stuff that needs to go away for sure. Is there something from the original XFL that you personally enjoyed?
There were a couple of things that I actually liked. I mean, there was a bunch of stuff I didn't like, but there were some things that I really did like. I liked the idea, and we're going to keep this, of players earning bonuses for winning games, right? And I think not only did the winning players like that, but fans like that because it was obviously you're going to work a little bit harder and stay focused and do your best to win the game. And sports is about which team wins and which team loses. I liked that. I liked. As well, we called it back then the spider cam, right, which now sort of commonly called the sky cam. I thought that was a great sort of innovation that Vince and the folks from NBC had, in the first go around. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Are there any team names or franchises that you think you can return? I know you haven't announced any cities just yet, though.
Well, yeah, you're right. We haven't announced any cities. We're getting fairly close to to announcing the sites of the 8 inaugural franchises. We will be in some cities that did host XFL teams in the past, back in 2001. But I'm reluctant to go any further than that, right? Because we think that. We had something like over 35 or 40, cities, communities that responded to our RFP. Clearly, a lot of sort of interest in a desire to have, a professional football franchise in the spring located in these markets. So we want to make sure we can do it, with and really treat everybody fairly with that. But we're very excited about being, very close to making some of those announcements.
Well, that's awesome. And that's some news right there. Back in one of the original cities, it sounds like. And as an LA Extreme fan, I'll be crossing my fingers, Oliver. But we know that you have a lot of meetings and a lot of things going on. You've had these Reimagination Committee meetings that seem so interesting. And the last we heard that you were discussing presentation technology with some experts. How'd that go? And what's the next step with these Reimagination Committees?
Well, it's been an interesting process. So basically, as I think you guys know, Vince wanted me and my team, if you will, to reimagine the game, right? He wanted a fast-paced game, sort of a high-octane, lots of plays, almost like a sort of a college hurry-up kind of an offense, right? Fewer stoppages, fewer breaks, more rhythm, more flow. And those are all things I think that football fans, complain about. I'm a football fan, right? I watch a lot of football both live and, on television or on my small screen. And I'm like everybody else, so I sort of complain about those things. So, Vince said reimagine the game, have that high-paced, high-octane game, fewer stoppages, more rhythm, more flow, and get it all done in 2 hours and 45 minutes. So, we've assembled a lot of different people. Former football coaches, current football coaches, tech people, guys who've played the game, and have really looked at doing as much as we possibly can to accomplish that goal. Now, it's still going to be football, right? It's 11 on 11. It's going to be a 100-yard field with 10-yard end zones, and the same dimensions. Obviously, the blocking, the tackling, the running, the kicking, the catching, all those things that we enjoy with football. But there are certain rules that we think we can tweak, we can modify, we can change a little bit, and we're trying to do all of that with an eye towards technology, right? But also with an eye towards something that I think is important, which is health and safety of players. If you think about the XFL in 2001. There wasn't much discussion, for better or for worse, about head trauma or concussions or health and safety of players. Right? It wasn't that long ago, 17 years ago, but it seemed like it was a century ago in terms of the health and safety approach. So we want to make sure, for example, that that certain modifications that we make are at the end of the day better for the health and safety of the players, particularly for head trauma, because that's something that that is a legitimate and serious challenge that the sport has. So we've been going through these reimagination sessions and really having a great time. We've encouraged people to think outside the box. We've wanted to sort of take some of the best ideas that, for example, exist in college football, obviously the best ideas of the NFL, and quite honestly, some of the best ideas of the Canadian Football League. Doug Flutie was one of our committee members, if you will, on this reimagination session. I really wanted to have a quarterback who had played in both the NFL and in the CFL, and Doug was willing to do this. And they have a 20-second play clock up in the CFL. That's pretty fast, and that makes that game, if you watch it, and of course, there's not much CFL on U.S. television, but if you watch a CFL game, there's a much, snappier pace than, at a college game in the U.S. or an NFL game. And I remember asking Doug, I said, Doug, so you play in the NFL, and then you go up to Toronto to play for the Argonauts, and of course you win a couple of Grey Cups, but did it take you a while to, adjust that clock that every quarterback has in his head? About when they get up to the line of scrimmage, call the play, snap the ball, not have to delay a game. And, Doug basically said it took him, basically a couple, 3 weeks, to sort of adjust his brain, to get that faster pace going. So those kind of discussions that we have. And we did all of this, right, with changes of, potential changes in the rule book, potential changes in what I call the administrative rules. Right? Do you need 6 timeouts? What if you had only 4 timeouts a game? And what if 2 of those 4 timeouts were sort of the equivalent of an NBA 30-second timeout? Just a really short break, not a long, 90-second or 2-minute break. We did all of that and said to ourselves, we don't want anything that's considered a gimmick, right? Because I think that was, quite honestly, to be very fair, that was one of the negatives of the XFL back in 2001. There were some things that I think football fans found to be gimmicky, and I think people respect the game too much. They love the game too much. Don't want the game to be, sort of brought down by gimmicks, right? So that's been a great experience. I could spend hours talking about sort of the some of the things we discussed. What's the best overtime rule, right? Do you like the college rules? And we talked to various coaches about that. Jim Harbaugh gave us a pretty interesting suggestion. I won't mention it, but a really interesting concept that he thinks would be better than both the college and the NFL rule. So there's a lot of really interesting things that we're very excited about. I guess the important thing, Alan, is that we are able to take the time, because we don't launch until 2020, to really have these kind of reimagination sessions and talk through these issues and then test them out, right? Test them out with fans, test them out with players. I mean, we anticipate when we start signing players, the next calendar year in the first quarter, second quarter of 2019, we want to test out some of these theses that we have, right? To make sure that, if we do change a rule or modify a rule, that it really is good and is going to work the way we think it's going to work.
Endless possibilities for sure. And when you brought up the CFL, it actually took me a year to kind of become a fan of it, but I watch it all the time now, Oliver. And you brought up the dimensions. Obviously, are going to stay the same as they are here in America, so the CFL in that regard isn't being considered. But would the 3 downs be considered a gimmick for the XFL?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things that we think are, sacrosanct, if you will. And, one of them is 11 players. One of them is 4 downs, just there's so much strategy that's been developed over the years and all the statistics, right? So, we think that, that makes some sense. We did discuss not lengthening the field because in many stadiums you could lengthen the field, but we considered the idea of maybe widening the field by a yard or 2, right? You don't have to widen it very much, but I think as you guys know and your listeners know, the field dimensions haven't changed for decades, but players have gotten, a lot bigger and a heck of a lot faster, And so we talked about hash marks as well. Where should they be? So we kind of said to ourselves, unless we have a really compelling reason to do it, then the default rule should be the NFL rule, right? Because the NFL is an extraordinarily popular league. I'm like everybody else. I'm in football heaven now that the regular season started. So unless there's a really compelling reason to change it, we think the default rule should be the NFL rule. So we decided at the end of the day to stay with the NFL dimensions and ultimately with the NFL hash marks, because that we believe hash marks really force a defense to defend the entire field, and I think that makes for a little bit better game than where the college hashes are.
You see, Vince, I think Oliver got to it there, and you're going to ask him that question. I know it. The 7-on-7 thing is not happening, man.
Yeah, Mr. Luck, 7-on-7 is becoming very popular amongst the high school ranks with camps going on in the off season. Was there any consideration to maybe get out in front of that and use that as a format, or maybe even, if it's not going to be for the entire game, maybe using it in an overtime situation?
Short answer is no. And I love 7-on-7. I mean, I living in Houston when my son Andrew was growing up. He did 7-on-7, went to all the summertime tournaments. I think it's awesome. It's one of the reasons that so many good college quarterbacks are coming out of did come out of states like Texas, where they were way ahead of the game in terms of 7-on-7. Right? All that great practice time. We didn't consider it, quite honestly, because it while it's fun and super, sort of educational, if you will, and great training for quarterbacks and wideouts, and obviously for defensive players as well, the so-called skill players. It's not tackle football, right? And I think what people really want to see is 11-on-11 tackle football. That's where I think the full strategy comes out. So no disrespect to 7-on-7, it's a great game, but ultimately 7-on-7, really is flag football, right? It's what we all played in, as kids in the empty lot or on the street or, whatever. Now they got flags, but in some states have helmets and some states don't. There's, some different rules, but we didn't really consider that, as any kind of a focal point for XFL play. We think there's something beautiful, quite honestly, about the traditional 11-on-11 game.
Oliver, this is Jake right now. I wanted to ask you, we understand we're going to be getting city announcements coming this fall. I wanted to ask you about what the ideal XFL city is. Is there any criteria you guys were looking for? For example, did you think it would benefit the XFL to have a pro team in that market already? Were you looking for a rabid college fan base, or to share any stadiums with with another brand?
Sure. So I'll answer that by giving you the 15-second elevator speech. So if you were in an elevator, with me and had 15 seconds, and said, "Hey, Mr. Luck, why is the XFL relaunching?" I would say this, that our research indicates there are 40 million passionate football fans, self-identified passionate football fans in this country. And those football fans, based on our research, you know what they want? They want more football. And they want it at a time when there is no football, which is basically, after the Super Bowl, February, March, April, into May. So, we're building our league around that passionate football fan. And I think there's a lot of passionate football fans all across the country. We think, quite honestly, and our research indicates this as well, there are considerably, higher percentages of passionate football fans, or I should say higher absolute numbers of passionate football fans in our bigger markets. No surprise, in the NFL markets, right? And those passionate football fans often, are season ticket holders of NFL teams, could be season ticket holders at local colleges as well. So, I won't answer the question of the ideal city because every city is different. And certainly there are lots of cities that have, incredibly passionate football fans. But we want to put our franchises in markets where we feel pretty comfortable that there's a significant number of passionate football fans, because our league really, I think, will begin with those passionate football fans. And they've told us very clearly they'd watch more NFL games, but, the season stopped. There's a limited number of football games that the body can take, right? So the NFL can't just add on, 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 more games. They love the NFL. They have no issues with the NFL. They'd watch more NFL if they could. But, if you think about it, football does kind of stop cold turkey, and it stops cold turkey, right after the Super Bowl, and it stays sort of cold turkey, until this past weekend, when the regular season kicks off, both for the colleges have been playing for a couple of weeks, but the first week for the NFL. So I guess short answer, we want to be in markets where, we really feel like we've got lots of passionate football fans.
Yeah, that stopping cold turkey's the worst, Oliver. I mean, it's going to be so great when that Super Bowl ends. We're going to have more football to look forward to year long. But the game is certainly changing when it comes to safety, right, Jake? We were talking about this a few shows ago, and it's a fine line, right?
I think there is still, a fan base out there that enjoys physical football. And you guys are going to have to, perform a balancing act, between player safety, but also catering to a demographic that just a couple years ago in the NFL, arguably was a lot more physical than it is right now.
Yeah, so you're right about it being sort of a delicate line, right? And it's moving, right? So I'm, I guess, someone who believes in science and believes in the sort of the basic rule that to be a responsible citizen, a responsible business owner, or whatever, that you have to follow the science in your industry, and the science in our business, football, certainly the head trauma science has developed over the last 15, 20 years. It's developed, incredibly quickly. Before that, there was hardly any really knowledge about head trauma, the best way to treat it, what should protocols be. So we have to follow the science. Football is a great game. I think it will certainly remain in our lifetimes. I'm 58. You guys are obviously probably younger, but in our lifetime, I think football will remain a very physical game. It's one of the things that people like about the game. But we also are trying at all levels. The NFL's doing this, the colleges are doing this. We'll be doing this. I think even the high schools and the lower youth football leagues are trying to take the head out of the game to make it as safe as possible. I was at the Colts game against the Bengals this Sunday, and one of the Bengals players got kicked out of the game, for a helmet-to-helmet shot against my kid, right? Probably a good decision by the referees to do that. So, we have to follow the science. That doesn't mean the game is any less physical. I mean, if anybody's down on the sideline of a major college football game or an NFL game, it's as physical, maybe more physical than it's ever been, given the increases in size and strength and, the increase in speed that players have. I mean, it's as physical, if not more physical game today than, when I played in the early 80s. So, we have to be smart. We have to be serious about it. We have to follow the science where it goes. But we also, I think, have to acknowledge to players, certainly professional players, that, hey, it's a rough game, guys. It's not that you don't know that. It's a rough game. You still want to play. That's great. You're assuming a certain level of risk. Right, so the legal proposition that there's an assumption of the risk, and we have to make sure we share as much information as we possibly can, be as transparent as we possibly can about that information with our players. So it's a challenge. I think the game can adapt. I think the game can adapt, for example, a little bit better than, for example, other sports have adapted over the years. Right, we all know about boxing. And sort of the challenges that boxing has had because of the dementia pugilistica, and so I think football can be. I think we can be smarter. We can be a little bit more progressive, and still keep that physical aspect that fans and players truly enjoy. But it is a challenge. But I think we all have to be we should be obligated to take the challenge very seriously, because it's a game absolutely worth protecting, because it's such an important part of the fabric of our life.
Absolutely, Mr. Luck. And switching gears just a little bit to talk about the presentation of the game. And you may not be able to speak a whole lot on this, but how important do you think it is to have the majority of the games on television versus individual streaming services? And are you exploring both those options? And could you maybe even speak into what options you're looking at? And have you even decided to look at any sort of radio broadcasts like Sirius?
Well, we I believe, have a pretty good opportunity to have both a linear television partner, one of the traditional networks, as well as a digital television partner, or perhaps digital television partners. I think for any startup league like ours, that it's critical to have exposure, right? We think we can put a good product in the field. We're really trying to reimagine, the sort of the preparation that these 8 teams and their coaches and their players are going to have, as we go into the first season, by really using all the sports performance science that exists to make sure that, we really come out of the chute playing good, crisp football. But so we think we can have a good product, but I think to really get the best exposure, we're going to need a linear broadcast agreement. We're in discussions with a number of different networks for that. We also think there's a growing audience for digital broadcast, and there's some really cool technological things you can do with digital that you really can't do with linear. So we think at the end of the day that we'll have partners in both the linear space as well as in the digital space. WWE, Vince's company, is remarkably proficient in the work that they do with their events and how they package those events and how they stream those events and all that sort of stuff. So we've got great knowledge and great sort of expertise that we can rely on as we go through these discussions. We haven't, quite honestly, I'll be very honest, talked about radio. We will at some point. That's just not really on the radar screen yet. Again, because we don't launch until 2020. But that's certainly a possibility. I'm like many of you, addicted to my Sirius channels, my sports channels that I listen to, along with some of the music channels. That just it hasn't been on a radar screen yet.
Sure. Well, certainly, if you're following Vince McMahon for guidance on how to get your product out there and on the biggest and best networks, that's the man to follow.
Absolutely. Man, Oliver, this has been tremendous getting to talk so much with you. And I can only imagine what these committee meetings are like. You guys are probably sitting there talking all day about the possibilities because they truly are endless for the XFL. You are league building, and we're very much looking forward to 2020 and really excited actually for next month when you will be at the New Lion Sports Media and Technology Conference. We'll finish it off there. What's the goal at that event, and will this be a day that something maybe gets revealed?
Oh, good question. I don't know if we'll reveal anything at the conference, but it's a great conference. I've attended in the past, with my previous positions at the NCAA and with West Virginia University, my alma mater. There's so much tech stuff happening in the world. And some of it has a really good application in sports. Some of it doesn't, quite honestly. But the things that we're looking at, thinking about doing, at least in terms of technology, both benefiting the fan experience, also benefiting players and coaches, right? And our broadcast, partners. So there's lots of things that I think are really good for us to begin to digest and better understand. And then there's, the 64,000-pound gorilla that's out there in terms of technology, and that's, online mobile sports wagering, right? Sports gambling. In those states, at least where, the respective state legislature has passed laws allowing that to take place. So that's, you could have a bunch of shows just about that aspect alone, but we think there's so many interesting things happening in the technological space that we want to make sure we can understand those. We can sort of share with that community what we're thinking about doing and what we may end up doing. So that's all a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that next month.
Yeah, absolutely. Me as well, Oliver. I really think there's huge opportunities for the XFL when it comes to apps and owning their fantasy games and owning, like you said, sports wagering. So big things are cooking on the road to 2020. We are 33 weeks in since the start of this show and the announcement of the XFL's return, Oliver. And ever since you were announced as the commissioner, we've been itching to get you on, and it was our pleasure having you on here for 30 good minutes. We appreciate you, and we look forward to talking to you on the road to 2020.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks very much, guys.